Elise threw the legal papers across the attorney's desk at me, her eyes blazing with the kind of righteous anger that comes from believing you deserve something that was never yours. The documents scattered and fluttered to the floor like fallen leaves, but her voice cut through the silence with surgical precision. "Sign it, Mom. Grandmother wanted me to have the estate, not you. Everyone knows I was her favorite grandchild, and you're just being greedy by keeping everything for yourself." Connor folded his arms and leaned back in his chair with that smug smile I had grown to hate over the past 6 months. He looked like someone watching a chess game where he already knew how it would end, confident that his strategy was about to pay off in spectacular fashion. The attorney, Mr. Harrison, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, clearly regretting that he had agreed to host this family meeting in his downtown office. He had probably seen plenty of inheritance disputes before, but the venom in my own daughter's voice seemed to surprise even him. Connor's smile widened as he delivered what he obviously thought was his winning move. "You don't want this to get ugly, Marilyn. Family court can be very unforgiving to people who try to steal from their children. Before I tell you how all this happened, I need a favor from everyone watching this. Comment below where you're watching from because I want to know how far this story travels. And please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, because what I'm about to share is a story about trust, betrayal, and the kind of greed you never expect from your own child. My name is Marilyn Cooper and I'm 58 years old. 6 months ago, I lost my mother to cancer after a long and difficult battle that brought our family together in ways I thought would last forever. I was wrong about the lasting part. What started as a family grieving together quickly turned into something ugly when money entered the picture. My daughter Elise, who had barely visited her grandmother during the last 2 years of her life, suddenly developed an intense interest in my mother's estate. The woman sitting across from me in that attorney's office, demanding that I sign away my inheritance, was someone I barely recognized. This wasn't the daughter I had raised with love and sacrifice for 29 years. But Elise's most shocking accusation was still coming. "Mom, you've been hoarding grandmother's belongings like some kind of obsessed collector. Everyone can see you're not mentally stable enough to manage an estate this size." The memory of my mother's last words came flooding back as I sat in that cold attorney's office. She had been lying in her hospital bed, weak from chemotherapy but still sharp as ever, when she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Marilyn," she whispered, her voice carrying the urgency of someone who knew her time was running out. "I need you to promise me something important. You have to protect what I built over 70 years of hard work." She paused to catch her breath, then continued with words that would prove prophetic. "More importantly, you need to protect yourself from people who love money more than they love family, even when those people share your last name." I had thought she was just being overly cautious, worried about distant relatives or family friends who might come looking for handouts after her funeral. I never imagined she was warning me about my own daughter. "Promise me you'll be careful who you trust," she said, squeezing my hand one final time. People show their true nature when inheritance is involved. 3 weeks after her funeral, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. Mom's old attorney was on the line with an urgent message. "Mrs. Cooper, we need to speak immediately. There's something about your mother's estate that you need to know." For the first 27 years of Elise's life, she had shown almost no interest in her grandmother beyond obligatory holiday visits and birthday cards. She was always too busy with work, too busy with friends, too busy with whatever new boyfriend was demanding her attention. When Mom got sick, Elise visited exactly 3 times during her 2-year battle with cancer. Each visit lasted less than an hour, and she spent most of that time on her phone, or checking her watch like she had somewhere more important to be. But suddenly, within days of Mom's funeral, Elise developed an intense fascination with every detail of the estate. She wanted to know about bank accounts, property values, insurance policies, and investment portfolios that she had never cared about before. The change was so dramatic that I initially thought grief was affecting her in strange ways. People process loss differently, and maybe Elise was trying to feel closer to her grandmother by learning about her financial legacy. Then came the request that made me realize something much darker was happening. "Mom, I think you should give me the keys to grandmother's house," Elise said during what I thought was a casual phone call. I want to go through her things and make sure nothing important gets lost or forgotten. The house she wanted access to contained 70 years of accumulated memories, family heirlooms, and financial documents that could be worth a fortune in the wrong hands. I started hearing Connor's voice through the thin walls of Elise's apartment during my visits, and his words made my blood run cold. He had always been controlling and manipulative, but now he was focused on something that could destroy our family permanently. Elise, you deserve that estate, I heard him say during one particularly heated phone conversation. Your mom is just hoarding it because she's selfish and doesn't want to share what should be yours anyway. His influence over my daughter had grown stronger since Mom's death, and I could see him poisoning her mind with ideas about entitlement and inheritance rights that had no basis in reality or legal precedent. Think about it logically, Connor continued, his voice carrying through the walls with the confidence of someone who thought he understood law better than actual lawyers. Your grandmother probably intended for you to have everything. Your mom is just too greedy to do the right thing. I stood frozen in Elise's kitchen, listening to my daughter's boyfriend convince her that I was somehow stealing what belonged to her. The manipulation was systematic and deliberate, designed to turn my own child against me for financial gain. But what I heard next made my stomach turn. Connor had started researching inheritance laws using my own Wi-Fi connection, looking for loopholes and legal strategies that could be used to challenge my mother's will. The first demand letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail with the kind of official appearance that meant serious legal trouble was brewing. The envelope was thick and formal, addressed to Mrs. Marilyn Cooper, with the kind of precise lettering that suggested professional legal preparation. Inside was a 3-page document accusing me of financial manipulation of an elderly family member and undue influence over estate planning decisions. The language was formal and threatening, designed to intimidate someone who didn't understand their legal rights. But the most shocking part was the signature at the bottom. My own daughter's name, written with the same careful handwriting I had taught her as a child, now being used to threaten legal action against me. You have 30 days to respond to these allegations, the letter concluded, or face formal litigation in probate court. I immediately called my attorney, Mr. Patterson, who had handled my family's legal affairs for over 20 years. When I read him the letter over the phone, his response was immediate and telling. Marilyn, did Elise really write this herself? He asked, his voice carrying the skepticism of someone who had seen plenty of inheritance disputes. The legal terminology is too sophisticated for someone without formal training. Someone coached her through this. The family meeting that Elise requested was obviously a trap from the moment I walked into her apartment. She had arranged the furniture like a courtroom, with Connor and herself sitting on one side of the coffee table while a single chair waited for me on the other side. Connor had a legal pad covered with notes, and Elise had printed out what looked like financial documents and property assessments. This wasn't a family discussion about grief and healing. This was an ambush designed to pressure me into signing away my inheritance. Mom, we need to talk about grandmother's estate, Elise began, her voice carrying the artificial warmth of someone delivering rehearsed lines. We think there might have been some mistakes in the legal paperwork that need to be corrected. Connor jumped in immediately, not even waiting for me to respond. The thing is, Marilyn, we have reason to believe that your mother changed her will without telling you. There might be documents you haven't seen that show different intentions than what you think. The accusation was carefully crafted to plant doubt about whether I actually understood my mother's wishes, suggesting that I might be operating on outdated or incomplete information about her final decisions. I looked them both in the eye, smiled slightly, and said with perfect calm, "Is that so?" They had no idea that my smile meant I already knew more than they thought. My calm reaction seemed to rattle both Elise and Connor, who had clearly expected tears, arguments, or defensive explanations about my mother's estate planning decisions. Instead, they got someone who appeared completely untroubled by their accusations and threats. Well, Elise stammered, suddenly looking less confident about her prepared speech. We just think it's important that everyone understands what grandmother really wanted for her legacy. Connor tried to regain control of the conversation by leaning forward with his most intimidating expression. The point is, we need to see all the documentation. Every will, every trust document, every legal paper that might affect this estate. He was fishing for information, hoping I would reveal details about my mother's financial arrangements that they could use to challenge her decisions. But I had learned from my mother's warnings about protecting myself from people who love money more than family. I think that's a reasonable request, I said, maintaining my eerily calm demeanor. I'd be happy to share all the relevant documentation with you. Then I delivered the line that made them both shift uncomfortably in their seats. But first, I'd like to see all the evidence you have about these supposed mistakes in the legal paperwork. If you're making claims about my mother's intentions, you must have some documentation to support those accusations. They scrambled for words, realizing they had brought accusations without evidence to back up their claims. That evening, I began searching through Mom's old files with the methodical precision of someone who finally understood the stakes involved. She had always been organized about paperwork, keeping detailed records of every financial decision and legal arrangement she had ever made. Her home office contained filing cabinets full of documents spanning decades of careful financial planning. Bank statements, insurance policies, investment records, and legal correspondence were all organized by date and category with the efficiency of someone who understood that details matter. As I worked through the files, I discovered that Mom's will had indeed undergone revisions over the years, just as Connor had suggested. But the changes weren't what Elise and her boyfriend were hoping to find. The most recent revision had been made just 6 months before Mom's death, and it contained provisions that neither Elise nor Connor knew about. Mom had been more aware of family dynamics than any of us realized. But then I found something that made my hands tremble. A sealed envelope tucked behind the official will documents, marked with my mother's careful handwriting. The envelope was addressed, to Marilyn only, and marked to be opened if Elise ever demands the estate. My mother had anticipated this exact situation, and left me something that would change everything. My hands shook as I opened the sealed envelope that my mother had hidden behind her official will documents. Inside was a letter written in her familiar handwriting, dated just 3 months before her death when she was still mentally sharp and fully aware of her decisions. My dearest Marilyn, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means that my fears about Elise's character were justified, and she has chosen money over family loyalty. I sat in Mom's kitchen, surrounded by the silence of her empty house, as her words from beyond the grave explained exactly what she had observed about my daughter's true nature. I have watched Elise's behavior carefully over the past few years, and I've seen how she treats people when she thinks no one important is watching. She has shown a pattern of selfishness and entitlement that worries me deeply. But the most shocking revelation was still coming. If Elise ever tries to claim my estate or pressure you to share what I've left you, give the enclosed document to a judge. It will end any legal challenge she might attempt. My breath stopped completely as I realized what Mom was telling me. Inside the envelope was a second document that would destroy any case Elise might try to build. A handwritten confession in my daughter's own teenage handwriting, admitting to stealing money from her grandmother's purse during family visits. The confession was dated from when Elise was 17 years old, written in the careful script of someone trying to sound mature and remorseful. But the content revealed a pattern of theft that I had never known about during her teenage years. Dear Grandmother, the letter read, I need to confess something that's been bothering me for months. I've been taking money from your purse when you're not looking. I know it's wrong, but I always tell myself I'll pay it back somehow. She had detailed the amounts and dates, creating a record that my mother had apparently kept as insurance against future problems. Over the course of 2 years, Elise had stolen nearly $3,000 from her grandmother, while maintaining the pretense of being a loving granddaughter. I promise I'll never do it again, the confession concluded. And I hope you can forgive me for betraying your trust. I know you love me, and I don't want to disappoint you anymore. My mother had kept this confession for over 10 years, never confronting Elise about the theft, but never throwing away the evidence either. She had understood something about my daughter's character that I had been too loving to see. The confession was signed and dated, creating an undeniable record of Elise's willingness to steal from the very person whose estate she now claimed to deserve. My phone buzzed with a text message that made the timing of this discovery feel almost supernatural. Mom, my lawyer says we're filing the lawsuit next week. Last chance to avoid court. Connor's pressure campaign escalated dramatically after our family meeting failed to produce the results he had expected. His phone calls became more frequent and aggressive, with accusations designed to make me doubt my own mental stability and legal position. Marilyn, you're being selfish and unstable, he told me during a particularly nasty conversation. Everyone can see that you're not thinking clearly about this situation. You need professional help. His manipulation tactics were textbook emotional abuse, attacking my mental state, isolating me from my daughter, and positioning himself as the reasonable voice trying to prevent family destruction. Elise is heartbroken that you won't do the right thing, he continued, his voice dripping with false concern. She just wants what her grandmother would have wanted, but you're making this into some kind of power struggle. But then Connor made a critical error that revealed his true motivations. During what he thought was a private phone conversation with Elise, he said something that I wasn't supposed to hear. Don't worry about your mom's feelings. I've already budgeted the inheritance money into our investment plan. He had been planning to spend my mother's estate before any legal decision had been made, treating my family's legacy like his personal retirement fund. The slip revealed that this entire legal campaign wasn't about Elise's relationship with her grandmother or family loyalty. It was about Connor's greed and his plan to use my daughter to access wealth that had never belonged to him. My mother's trust will contain provisions that Elise and Connor had never suspected, protections that revealed just how well Mom had understood the situation she was leaving behind. The document was comprehensive and legally airtight, prepared by an attorney who specialized in protecting estates from family challenges. I leave my entire estate, including all properties, financial assets, and personal belongings, to my daughter Marilyn Cooper, the will stated clearly. This decision reflects my complete confidence in her character, judgment, and ability to preserve our family's legacy. But the most important section was a clause that Mom had added during her final revision, specifically designed to address the possibility of legal challenges. If any beneficiary or family member attempts to contest this will or coerce my chosen heir, they shall receive nothing from my estate and forfeit any claim to future consideration. She had anticipated exactly what was happening and created a legal trap that would spring shut if Elise continued her lawsuit. Any attempt to challenge my inheritance would result in her complete exclusion from any future family legacy. The will also contain detailed explanations of Mom's reasoning, including her observations about Elise's character and her concerns about Connor's influence over my daughter's decisions. I printed multiple copies of the complete will, understanding that I now held documentation that would end any legal challenge in court, while protecting everything my mother had worked 70 years to build. Elise walked into my house the following Monday with her chin held high, and an expression of cold determination that I had never seen on her face before. She was dressed professionally, like someone heading to an important business meeting, and she carried herself with the artificial confidence of someone about to deliver an ultimatum. Mom, I wanted to tell you personally before you hear it from the lawyers, she announced, standing in my living room like she was addressing a board meeting rather than speaking to her mother. Connor and I have decided to move forward with formal legal action. We're filing a lawsuit to challenge grandmother's will, and we're confident that any reasonable judge will see that she intended for me to inherit her estate. The words hit me like physical blows, not because I was surprised, but because hearing my own daughter threaten to sue me made the betrayal complete and final. I'm sorry it has to be this way, she continued, though her tone suggested she felt no remorse whatsoever. But you've left us no choice. We tried to resolve this privately, but you're being too stubborn to listen to reason. As she turned to leave, she delivered her parting shot with the cruelty that only family members can achieve. See you in court, Mom. I hope you're prepared for what's going to come out during the legal proceedings. My heart broke as I watched her walk away, but my resolve remained unshakable. The settlement offer arrived by email the next morning, a formal document that revealed just how confident Elise and Connor were about their legal position. Their attorney was proposing a division of assets that would give them 70% of my mother's estate, while allowing me to keep 30%, in the interest of family harmony. The offer was accompanied by a letter suggesting that accepting this arrangement would avoid the embarrassment and expense of a prolonged court battle that could damage family relationships permanently. But the most insulting part was the timeline. I had 48 hours to accept their generous offer, or face the full force of their legal challenge with no possibility of future negotiation. I sat at my computer, staring at the settlement documents that treated my mother's life's work like a business transaction to be negotiated between strangers. The casual dismissal of my mother's wishes and my own legal rights was breathtaking in its arrogance. My response was immediate and absolute. No. One word. Sent back to their attorney without explanation or counter-proposal. I wasn't negotiating with people who were trying to steal my mother's legacy, while destroying our family in the process. The next morning, Connor posted on social media about his excitement over coming into wealth that will change our lives forever, complete with photos of luxury cars and vacation destinations that he was apparently planning to purchase with estate money that didn't belong to him. My attorney, Mr. Patterson, spent the following week organizing our defense with the methodical precision of someone who had been practicing family law for over 30 years. His office became a war room filled with documents, recordings, and evidence that would demolish Elise's case. Marilyn, this is one of the strongest inheritance defense cases I've ever seen, he told me as we reviewed the materials my mother had left behind. Your daughter has no legal standing whatsoever, and the evidence of her previous theft creates serious credibility problems. We organized everything into a comprehensive presentation. Witness statements from family friends who had observed Elise's neglect of her grandmother, medical records proving my mother's mental competency when she revised her will, and most importantly, Elise's own confession about stealing money. The judge is going to be very interested in this confession, Patterson said, examining the handwritten document that my mother had preserved for over a decade. It establishes a pattern of dishonesty and entitlement that directly contradicts her current claims about deserving the inheritance. But then we discovered something that made our case even stronger. A forged spreadsheet that Elise had submitted as evidence of my mother's true intentions for the estate distribution. The document was obviously fake, created on Connor's computer and backdated to make it appear that my mother had prepared it before her death. The metadata from the file revealed exactly when and where it had been created, providing undeniable proof of fraud. The night before our court hearing, I received a text message from Elise that revealed just how desperate she had become as the reality of her weak legal position began to sink in. Mom, you can still avoid the humiliation of having your mental stability questioned in open court, the message read. Dad's lawyer says things could get ugly if you force us to present all our evidence about your recent behavior. The threat was obviously designed to make me panic about what they might say during the hearing, but I had learned from my mother's wisdom about protecting myself from people who love money more than family. What Elise didn't realize was that threatening me had triggered something much more dangerous for her case. Connor's overconfidence was about to provide me with the final piece of evidence I needed to destroy their lawsuit completely. Later that evening, my phone rang with a call from Connor that went straight to voicemail. He apparently thought he was leaving a message for Elise, but had accidentally dialed my number instead. The voicemail he left would become the smoking gun that ended their legal challenge before it could even begin. Connor's voice was clear and unmistakable as he laid out his true strategy. Elise, make sure you get your mom to sign anything we put in front of her. I don't care how you do it, or what you have to promise. We need that house and the investment accounts. Connor's accidental voicemail was a gift that exposed everything they had been planning in private. His voice continued with instructions that proved their entire legal strategy was based on manipulation and fraud rather than legitimate inheritance rights. If she won't sign voluntarily, we'll use the mental incompetency angle, Connor's voice said clearly. Your lawyer thinks we can convince a judge that she's not capable of managing the estate properly, especially if we present the right kind of evidence. But the most damaging part came when he outlined their backup plan. Worst case scenario, we drag this out until she runs out of money for legal fees. Most people cave when they realize how expensive court battles can get. The recording revealed that they had never expected to win based on the merits of their case. Instead, they were planning to exhaust my resources and break my will through prolonged legal harassment. Connor's final comment was the most telling. Once we get control of that money, we can pay off my student loans, buy the condo downtown, and finally start living the life we deserve. I saved the voicemail recording in 3 different formats and locations, understanding that Connor had just confessed to attempted fraud, elder abuse, and litigation harassment in a permanent audio record that would destroy their credibility in court. The man who thought he was going to steal my mother's estate had just provided me with evidence that would send their entire case crashing down in spectacular fashion. The courthouse was packed when we arrived for the hearing, with Elise and Connor entering through the main doors like celebrities arriving for a red carpet event. Elise wore an expensive dress that I didn't recognize, probably purchased in anticipation of her inheritance windfall. Connor walked beside her with the smirking confidence of someone who believed he had already won, occasionally whispering strategy tips in her ear, and adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a business presentation rather than a legal proceeding. Judge Morrison entered the courtroom with the stern expression of someone who had presided over countless family inheritance disputes, and had little patience for greed disguised as legal rights. The bailiff called the court to order, and Elise's attorney immediately stood to present their opening statement about my supposed mental incompetency and my mother's true intentions for her estate. Your Honor, the attorney began, we have compelling evidence that Mrs. Cooper exercised undue influence over her elderly mother and manipulated the will creation process to benefit herself at the expense of her daughter. But when he reached into his briefcase to present their primary piece of evidence, Judge Morrison's expression shifted to one of obvious skepticism. The forged spreadsheet that they were about to present as proof of my mother's wishes was about to be exposed as fraudulent in front of a packed courtroom. Judge Morrison examined the spreadsheet that Elise's attorney presented as evidence of my mother's estate planning intentions, but his scrutiny revealed problems immediately. The document was obviously created on a computer, despite being dated from a time when my mother was in the hospital and had no access to technology. Counselor, this document appears to have been created recently and backdated, Judge Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen every kind of inheritance fraud imaginable. The formatting, font choices, and digital properties are inconsistent with the claimed creation date. This document is fabricated. Elise went pale as she realized that their primary piece of evidence was being dismissed as fake, before they could even explain its supposed significance. Connor shifted nervously in his seat, probably wondering if the judge could somehow trace the document back to his computer. Your Honor, Elise's attorney stammered. There may have been some confusion about the document's origins, but the content reflects authentic communications about the estate. Judge Morrison's response was swift and final. Counselor, presenting fraudulent evidence to this court is a serious matter. I suggest you sit down and reconsider your entire approach to this case. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations as people realized they were witnessing a legal strategy collapse in real time. My attorney stood up with my mother's sealed letter, ready to present evidence that would end this charade permanently. Judge Morrison accepted the sealed letter that my mother had left specifically for this situation, opening it carefully while the entire courtroom waited in tense silence. His eyes moved across the pages slowly, methodically, as he absorbed my mother's detailed explanation of her estate decisions. The letter contained not just her reasoning for leaving everything to me, but also her observations about Elise's character, and her concerns about Connor's influence over my daughter's behavior and moral judgment. After several minutes of reading, Judge Morrison looked up from the documents and fixed his gaze directly on Elise, who was squirming in her chair under the weight of his judicial scrutiny. Ms. Cooper, he said, his voice carrying the gravity of someone about to expose a fundamental truth. This letter references a written confession that your grandmother preserved for over 10 years. He held up the handwritten confession that had been sealed with my mother's letter, the document that proved Elise's history of stealing from the very person whose estate she now claimed to deserve. According to this confession, you admitted to systematically stealing money from your grandmother during your teenage years, Judge Morrison continued, each word falling like a hammer blow. The courtroom fell into complete silence as everyone processed the implications of what the judge was revealing. Ms. Cooper, is this your handwriting? He asked, holding up the confession for her to see. Elise's face cycled through expressions of shock, panic, and desperate calculation as she realized that her teenage confession was about to destroy her entire legal case. She tried to deny the handwriting at first, claiming she had never written any such document. Your Honor, I have no memory of writing anything like that, she said, her voice shaking with obvious fear. If such a document exists, it must have been forged or taken out of context. But Judge Morrison had experience with handwriting analysis and document authentication, and Elise's denial only made her situation worse. When her denials proved unconvincing, she immediately turned on Connor, throwing him under the bus with the desperation of someone trying to save herself from a sinking ship. This whole lawsuit was Connor's idea, she said, pointing at her boyfriend with trembling fingers. He convinced me that I deserved the inheritance, and that my mother was being unfair. I never wanted to sue my own family. Connor's face flushed red as he realized that Elise was preparing to blame him for everything, destroying their relationship along with their legal case. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished with his examination of the evidence. Ms. Cooper, we also have an audio recording that I believe you need to hear. My attorney pressed play on Connor's accidental voicemail, and his voice filled the courtroom with crystal clear evidence of their fraudulent intentions and manipulative strategy. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps as Connor's voice echoed through the speakers, his own words condemning him more effectively than any prosecutor could have managed. Get your mom to sign anything we put in front of her. I don't care how you do it, his recorded voice declared for everyone to hear. We need that house and the investment accounts. Connor's face drained of blood as he listened to his own confession being played in front of a judge, lawyers, and a gallery full of witnesses who were now hearing exactly what kind of person had been orchestrating this legal attack. Elise began crying as she realized that her boyfriend had just destroyed any credibility she might have had left with the court. The recording proved that their lawsuit was never about family loyalty or inheritance rights. Your Honor, Elise's attorney said weakly, my client was clearly manipulated by outside influences and may not have understood the implications of the legal action she was pursuing. But Judge Morrison had heard enough. The evidence was overwhelming, the fraud was obvious, and the manipulation was documented in the defendant's own words. He slammed his gavel with the finality of someone who had reached a decision that would change multiple lives forever. Order in this court, he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos that had erupted around us. The verdict was about to begin with words that would vindicate everything my mother had tried to protect. Mrs. Cooper retains. Judge Morrison's voice carried the full weight of legal authority as he delivered his final ruling on the inheritance dispute that had torn our family apart. Mrs. Marilyn Cooper retains full ownership of her mother's estate, including all properties, financial assets, and personal belongings as specified in the legally valid will, he announced, his words echoing through the packed courtroom. All claims by Ms. Elise Cooper are dismissed with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled or reconsidered by this court or any other jurisdiction. The relief that washed over me was so intense that I had to grip the table to keep from collapsing as months of stress and fear finally released their hold on my chest. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished protecting my mother's legacy. Furthermore, Ms. Cooper is ordered to pay her mother's legal fees as compensation for the frivolous nature of this lawsuit and the fraudulent evidence presented to this court. He explained that the attempted fraud, the forged documents, and Connor's recorded confession had created a case so obviously without merit that financial penalties were appropriate. This court finds that the plaintiff engaged in litigation harassment designed to exhaust the defendant's resources rather than pursue legitimate legal rights, he concluded. I could breathe freely for the first time in months, knowing that my mother's wishes were protected, and that justice had prevailed over greed. As the judge dismissed the court, Elise whispered desperately, "Mom, wait." Elise reached for my arm as I stood to leave the courtroom, her voice breaking with what might have been genuine remorse, or simply panic about the financial consequences she now faced. "Mom, please wait. I know I made mistakes, but you're still my mother. Can't we work this out as a family? I looked at the daughter I had raised with love and sacrifice for 29 years, seeing clearly for the first time the person she had chosen to become under Connor's influence. Elise, I hope you learned something valuable from this experience, I said quietly, stepping back from her reaching hand. But I'm done being your target. I'm done being manipulated and threatened by people who are supposed to love me. Connor sat slumped in his chair, probably calculating how much money he would owe in legal fees and how completely his scheme had backfired. I walked out of that courthouse into bright afternoon sunlight, feeling the weight of months of stress lifting from my shoulders with each step I took away from the family that had tried to destroy me for money. Free. Protected. Unbroken. The inheritance my mother had worked 70 years to build was safe, and the people who had tried to steal it were facing the consequences of their greed. Know your worth, I said aloud as I reached my car, thinking about everyone who might be facing similar family betrayal. Even when family tries to strip it away, know your worth and protect what you've earned.